We start off with breaking news as the world mourns the loss of Pope Francis. He passed away at the age of 88. Francis was elected in 2013 as the 266th Pope, continuing a line going all the way back to the Apostle St. Peter. He was the first Latin American pontiff and the first Jesuit Pope. Francis made only brief public appearances since he was diagnosed being discharged from the hospital after undergoing over 5 weeks of treatment for pneumonia in both lungs. Words of reflection are pouring in for Pope Francis, including from Dr. Bernice King, who posted on Instagram saying, in part, his loss at this time in the state of our world where freedom, justice, and democracy are being daily undermined leaves a huge moral void. Pope Francis, working to the very end, giving a traditional Easter blessing yesterday from the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. In his address, the Pope made a strong appeal for peace around the world, particularly in Gaza, and offered prayers to Christian communities around the world. Joining us this morning is Susan Reynolds, Assistant Professor of Catholic Studies at Emory University School of Theology. Susan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
First, give us your take on the news that you received this morning.
Oh, I was shocked when I woke up. Of course, as you mentioned, Pope Francis actually appeared to the surprise of some yesterday during Easter celebrations. And of course, as we heard as well, he met with the vice president briefly. So to wake up to news that he had passed overnight was quite shocking.
Wow. You know, he was working up to the very end, as we stated, going out even maybe against his doctor's orders, especially with children, that kind of thing. He went out there and he did what he did, right? What he was probably comfortable with doing. Do you think this was the way he wanted to go out?
Oh, absolutely. I think his entire pontificate in some way has been this witness to the joy that he finds in being close to others. He's a very extroverted person. And in some ways, he was always out and about. He was close to particularly those on the margins. He was always close to the suffering. He was close to people who others tended to neglect. Up until the very end, he was with other people.
Mm-hmm. He was doing God's work for about 12 years and with plenty of shifts in the Catholic Church. Break down his legacy. How will he be remembered?
He'll be remembered, of course, as the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, the first non-European pope in centuries and centuries, and in a certain way, a very modern kind of pope. He was the first pope since the 1960s not to have participated in a big multi-year reform process called the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. And among other things, people might associate that council with, for example, the Mass, which used to be in Latin everywhere, is now in local languages. And he was the first pope of his era not to be part of that process. So his entire priesthood, his entire pontificate took place in this kind of modern, highly globalized, highly diverse era within the church. And you can see that in his legacy. The cardinals he appointed, for example, were from far-flung areas of the globe. He globalized the church. He brought women and lay people into the hierarchy, the bureaucracy of the church. He was somebody who was in many ways unafraid of the new, the modern, the diverse, the global. He was somebody who welcomed all of that with open arms. And I think people saw that in the way that he participated in dialogue, participated in gatherings of non-Christian leaders, for example. He was somebody who was unafraid of being in solidarity with the world. And I think that's part of the power in his legacy.
Where would he, for lack of a better phrase, stack up against modern popes?
Well, of course, we could never rank modern popes, and in many ways, it would be more appropriate to talk about their similarities. Pope Francis didn't change church doctrine in any meaningful way, but for him, style, I think, was substance. He led with this very personal, very humane, very pastoral way of being, whereas Pope Benedict and John Paul II, his two most immediate predecessors, were philosophers and theologians. They were teachers in some way. He was really a pastor, and you saw that in the way that he always managed to see the individual before him, before he saw an issue, for example. And I think that sort of deeply personal, deeply humane approach is part of what made him such a powerful figure across the globe.
Yeah. And now comes the process of trying to come up with a new pope, right? Talk about the process that involves.
Well, the cardinals will convene in Rome. And what's interesting about that, as I mentioned, is that he has appointed more than half, I think around 2/3, if I'm correct, of the current voting cardinals. And so the process will look very different than it did 12 years ago when he was elected in March of 2013. It's a much more global group of individuals, a different generation in some way of individuals. And so at this point, it's really anyone's guess who is next.
Quickly, do you think they'll carry on his type of humanity?
I think so. I think that is inevitable. The power of his witness and of that love and attention for those on the margins, I think, is a lasting legacy in the church.
Susan Reynolds, assistant professor with Catholic Studies at Emory University. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing your insight.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. All right.